Hello, my name is Joseph Wieliczko. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm here to talk to you today about the issue of cravings. Um, as a psychologist, I have a program called Mindful Eating and Stress Management. It's an 8-session online program, and part of the program includes talking about cravings and how to cope with them using a mindfulness approach. So let me start by talking about or explaining what mindful eating is. There are three aspects to the definition. The first is that when we eat mindfully, we use all the senses. So when we sit down to eat, we ground ourselves in this moment and we take things in through the five senses. If we are distracted, we come back to the moment. What does the food look like? What does it taste like? We take a nice deep breath. Okay. How does it taste in the mouth? Do you notice the evolution of a taste of food in your mouth? The food taste could be strong and then it kind of dwindles. You chew it, it obviously gets smaller and smaller, then you swallow. Just being aware of this with a gentleness and an ease, and obviously a joy. You want to enjoy your food. But the idea is to be with the senses. Also, to eat mindfully means to pay attention to the thoughts and the feelings you have in the course of the day that relate to food. So to be aware that if all of a sudden someone frustrates you, your mind gravitates to food. Or if you are feeling stressed out during the day, your mind gravitates to food. Just being aware of that. So that's part one. Part two of how we define mindful eating is that when we eat mindfully, we choose foods that are satisfying and nurturing to the body. Okay. The only way we know that is if we pay attention to how the body reacts to having consumed that food. So, for instance, if you have a nice big salad, how does that make your body feel? Also, how would it make your body feel to eat 3 or 4 donuts? If you compare the two, you can see logically that it makes the body feel different. Okay. The body knows what to do with a salad. It really doesn't know what to do with 3 or 4 donuts. Okay. So it's being in tune to how the body reacts and let that be the guide as to what you should do in terms of your food selection. Third, when we eat mindfully, we choose to stop eating when the body no longer says it's hungry. Now, if you notice, the important thing is I said when the body says it's no longer hungry, not you saying you're no longer hungry. Okay. So you can see the emphasis I'm putting it on is the message the body is giving you. Okay. We call it interoceptive awareness. The body is constantly giving you information. Some of that you're used to, some of it you're not. So you may be used to when the body says it's cold, putting on a sweater. You're probably used to it when the body says at night, oh, I'm really tired, I need sleep, you go to sleep. Okay. So it's more of that type of thing. So when the body says it's no longer hungry, we choose to stop eating. Now, I've worked with a lot of people who have struggled with eating issues for years. And I have to tell you that no one has ever come back to me and said, I, I just can't stop eating, even though my body's not hungry. Okay. They're able to do that if you align your awareness with your body and get yourself out of your head. That's the important thing. So those are the three aspects to the definition of mindful eating. Now you will be given handouts which cover all this material, so you really don't have to take notes or anything. Just listen and enjoy. Now, if you notice about how I described what mindful eating is, there's nothing there about depriving yourself, struggling, sacrificing, deprivation. Okay. What I'm suggesting you do is just bring awareness. Okay. And the awareness has to do with honoring the body and listening to what it wants. So if you do it in that way, there is no deprivation. I'm not suggesting you deny yourself anything if your body needs it. I'm just saying align yourself with your body so you know what it needs and you can give it what it needs. So unlike dieting, there is no deprivation here. You are in harmony with your body, and that's what we want. Okay. So what we need to do is practice cultivating awareness, because if we could heighten our awareness, we'll be able to do mindful eating. We'll be able to honor the body, get in touch with the senses, enjoy the senses and the experience of eating. And when we do that, when we have that awareness, well, we start to learn more. We start to understand our unique relationship to food. We start to have an acceptance and a tolerance for our eating difficulties. So let me shift a little bit to mindfulness and what that means. Mindfulness means to pay attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. It's that simple. Okay? Paying attention on purpose in this present moment, non-judgmentally. It means just to take things in as they are, not discriminating, not judging it, not overly identifying with it, taking it personally, none of that. Like a scientist, you just take it in, you want to learn from. Okay? And the idea here is there are a number of practices I teach, including formal meditation, which enables you to train your brain to be more grounded in this moment. And when you do that, that heightened awareness is so constructive and helpful for a variety of reasons. The important takeaway here is that if we don't have awareness of things, we are destined to repeat the old patterns. So let's get on to cravings. Interesting thing about cravings. Cravings could be physiological in nature, they can be psychological in nature, they can be both. If it's physiological, that basically means your body is saying it needs something, so you give it. For instance, if you are dehydrated, that's really not an issue here. Cravings for many people tend to be psychological in nature, and they could be either stress induced, memory induced, or emotion induced. Stress induced basically means that we are in heightened level of stress. We don't like it. We want relief. And all of a sudden a craving hits. We want something. Okay. Memory induced. In childhood, we have all these memories of things we used to eat that we thought tasted so great. And now we look back and we're having a difficult time. We want to relive our childhood and just feel good. So we go for that food. Okay, it's just a memory thing. It's not genuine hunger. It's not physiological. It's memory. It's in your head. Lastly is emotion. Many people who have difficulties with food can have difficulties managing their emotions, so that instead of dealing with their emotions more constructively, they resort to food because they just want some relief. They always call it comfort food, right? We all know the term. So, to help us with cravings, there is a wonderful quote I'd like to read to you of unknown sources. It reads like this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I'll read that again. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So the idea here is stimulus and response. Stimulus is when the craving hits. Response is how you deal with the craving. Usually for many people, it's eating. So if you have a craving that hits and you respond very quickly to eating because of it, there's very little space. Okay? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In mindful eating, we want to spread out the two to have greater space. And that space enables us, it allows us to choose a response that can be for our growth and our freedom. Now, want to point out what happens with the thought process when we have a craving. Well, the first thing is our thinking gets very narrowed. We don't see options. It's like a tunnel vision, okay? Very narrow, simple thinking. Secondly, the problem solving ability is shut down. We don't think in terms of various options. It's just, this is it. This is what I want. I'm going for it. We tend to be in an agitated, energized state or off kilter when we have a craving. We also exercise poor judgment. That's very typical of people because when people have a craving and they're struggling, they go for foods that are either high fat, high salt, or high sugar. Okay, they don't go for a celery, right? Who does that when they're really stressed out and they have a craving? No one. Okay. Poor judgment. There is a woman I met when I did a presentation on mindful eating, and she told me that when she has a craving for chocolate, she has to have it or she's going to die. That's poor judgment. That's an example of your thinking is so narrow and so distorted. It happens to all of us, okay? But the idea is we have to break out of that. And if we're still agitated, we don't simmer ourselves down, we're stuck with this irrational thinking, okay? When we have a craving, we also want immediate relief. There's little tolerance for this state of being, okay? We get stuck in our thoughts. We're not in our experience. So what I'd like people to do is start to create greater space between the craving and the eating. And in that space, we start to have options. Okay, so how do we do that? I have some concrete suggestions that you'll have in the handout. The first thing is we want to be curious. Okay, most people, when they have a craving, they're not curious. They just want relief. I'm going to suggest something pretty different. Be curious about it. Take a couple of deep breaths. Just settle yourself down. Okay? Center yourself in your body. Get out of your head. Let yourself settle down. Now, you're going to have to tolerate being a little uncomfortable. And the thing is, for many people, they have little tolerance for that. And I'm going to suggest you start to gain more tolerance for discomfort. It's just fine. It's manageable. And if you show yourself you can do it a couple of times, you're right with it, doing it over and over again, which builds confidence in being able to manage yourself in those difficult moments. A couple of good questions you could ask yourself. What type of hunger am I feeling? Is it genuine hunger? Is it false hunger? Genuine hunger tends to be your body is saying it's hungry. False hunger tends to be you're thinking about food, you smell it, you see it, you taste it, and you think those are indications that you really need the food. It's not, it's false hunger. You also want to consider when's the last time you ate. If you had a full meal about an hour ago, chances are it's not genuine hunger. Okay? If you last ate 6 hours ago, chances are pretty good it could be genuine hunger. You want to ask yourself, am I in a state of stress right now? Is that what's behind this? Okay. Am I feeling emotional? Did something happen? Did I get bad news? Am I feeling worried about something right now? Okay. And also, you want to consider opening up the idea of cravings. Craving doesn't have to be for food. Many times we lump all our cravings into food because we see it as the only relief. Now, when we crave a lot of different things. You could be craving companionship. You could be craving a walk, fresh air, entertainment, some yoga, some stretching, some exercise, some sleep, a lot of different things. So just kind of consider that your craving could be for something else. Could be for love. Could be for someone to talk to, especially during the pandemic, right? We're all in these isolated states, oddly enough, together in isolation. It's kind of odd. But the idea here is that we have all types of needs, and we don't want to assume that everything comes down to food when it really doesn't. If you notice, all I've described about how to deal with a craving does not involve struggling, resistance, battling it. I'm suggesting you embrace it. You hug it. You be curious about it. You bring a kindness to yourself and say, let me just be with this and see what this feels like. What could I learn about myself? Okay, so that's a very different approach. Now, importantly, this is really kind of interesting. If you don't feed the craving, it withers. It withers away. So, what do I mean by feed the craving? Well, what I mean is most people, when they have a craving, it could last for a long time. It could because they keep propping it up with their thoughts, with images of it, with your imagination, talking to people about it, reading about it, thinking about it. Okay? All these things tend to prop it up and it keeps you thinking about it and wanting it and believing the craving. Whereas if you let go of that stuff, the craving should wither, assuming it's a psychological, emotional driven craving. Okay? It doesn't have to wither away, but most of the time it does. For instance, I met a woman who told me that she's thinking about food all day. Well, if you're thinking about food all day, you're constantly going to be craving it because you don't give yourself a chance. And an important thing about mindful eating is that when we eat mindfully, we satisfy the body and we move on. We don't keep thinking about food. There are many things in life to entertain us, to enjoy, to be part of. And we don't want food to be the only thing. Okay? So food has its place, just like everything else, and we want to keep it in that place. So, what are different ways, what are options you can do? Aside from what I've said so far, what are other things you can do to deal with the craving? The first thing is have a creative approach of how you're going to deal with it. It's not a cookbook thing. It's based on who you are, what you're going through in that moment, what your circumstances are. Okay. So for instance, if you have a craving and it's psychological, it's emotional, you could still eat the food. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing to do. The problem people get into is that they do it too often. Okay, then it could cause health problems. But you could eat the food you want. You can have a small amount of it. Okay, you can substitute something else that you feel is healthier to eat and satisfy the craving. Okay? You can meditate over it in what I call breathing through it, meaning when you have the craving, if you kind of sit with it and just be aware of it, what tends to happen is it kind of dismantles itself. It kind of breaks apart. Okay? You can call someone to talk to get yourself off of the craving. You can go for a walk. You can distract yourself in some way. You could address the emotional need if it's that. Find another way, a creative way of dealing with the stress. Create another option. Okay. Let me point something out. It's really kind of interesting. Have you ever had the experience of being in traffic and all of a sudden you get a craving for food, a certain type of food? And obviously you can't entertain it because you're in traffic. Well, an hour later you get home. And what happens? The craving is gone. That's what I'm talking about. The idea that it can wither on its own. It doesn't have to last forever. Nothing is permanent. People have this misunderstanding that if they have a craving, they have to satisfy it. And if they don't, it's just going to consume them forever. That's not the case, obviously. Okay? And notice your experiences. You will find that things constantly change. Okay? So what I'd like to do is end with something that's kind of interesting. I got this information off of the website called the Center for Mindful Eating. I suggest you check out their website. They have a lot of information about mindful eating and training and books and seminars. Great stuff. They have a section where they talk about the difference between genuine hunger and false hunger or emotional hunger. So how do we discriminate the two? Well, there are some concrete ways we can do that. One thing is genuine hunger tends to build gradually, whereas emotional hunger builds very quickly. It's very sudden. Genuine hunger strikes below the neck, it's in the body. Emotional hunger tends to be in the head. Okay? Physical hunger is satisfied with food. Emotional hunger is not. It may feel that way for the moment, but it's really not. Physical hunger takes hours to develop. Emotional hunger is unrelated to time. It could be very quick. Okay? Physical hunger goes away when you eat. Emotional hunger does not. Physical hunger, we tend to stop eating once we're satisfied, whereas emotional hunger, we tend to overeat because it's really not related to eating per se. Okay? And lastly, physical hunger leads to feeling satisfied. Emotional hunger leads to feeling guilty and ashamed. Okay, so those are some things you can think about, and you can actually you'll have that in the handout. When you read that, you keep that with you. So if you have a craving, look at that, see what it can teach you about how to learn to discriminate false from genuine hunger cues. I'd like to thank everyone for your time today. Okay, if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the Center for Mindful Eating website. You can go on my website. I have a lot of information. It's called Mindful for Life. That's MINDFUL, the number 4, life.com. So I thank you very much for your time and have a wonderful day.